You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. You're listening to us on CBS radio station 1580 AM in the Washington, D.C. area, or streaming on the web, WMCLive.com, where you can also find links to podcasts of all our previous shows. And I want to hear from you. Tweet me at hashtag WMCLive or email me at womensmediacenterlive@gmail.com. We start today with one of the issues dominating the news, immigration. And we cover what doesn't make news, immigration policy's impact on women. Then, since it's beginning to be graduation season, we learn about the triple whammy of gender, race, and class bias in academia. And we hear from two audacious change-making college presidents, Beverly Tatum of Spelman and Debora Spar of Barnard. But first, we have to go inside the headlines. We've all seen the signs posted on buses and subways, in parking lots and malls, in pretty much all public places. They read, "If you see something, say something." They refer, of course, to deterring a terrorist attack. They mean, spot that abandoned backpack. Who does that briefcase belong to anyway? And what is that man stuffing into a trash can so furtively? But lately I've begun to think, if you see something, say something, actually has much wider application. I'm talking about the Ariel Castro case in Cleveland, in which he allegedly abducted and imprisoned women for 10 years, torturing them, raping them repeatedly. Neighbors and his brothers claim they knew nothing. They heard no screams, despite the rapes and the beatings, despite the fact that he kicked and punched women in the stomach when they were pregnant in order to make them miscarry. Or did they think that was just a lover's quarrel because women screaming in the night, well, hey, that's normal? Did anybody think it was strange when an inordinate amount of groceries came to the house with only one man living there? Or that one man was living in a house that was mostly boarded up? Or that periodically he appeared in public with a little girl? No one thought to ask where she came from or where she went to? Now, of course, the neighbors are talking, and they've been caught making things up. Why? For 15 minutes of fame, to get interviewed on television, to be part of the excitement? Or did they actually see and hear things which they're now embroidering? In which case, why did they do nothing before? It brings to mind Kitty Genovese. For those of you too young to remember, Kitty Genovese was a young woman who was raped and murdered, knifed to death, on a street in 1964. Well, reportedly, 38 people heard and saw and did nothing. Later accounts said it was fewer than 38, but it doesn't really matter whether it was 6 or 12. They did nothing. One called out, "You leave that woman alone." Kitty Genovese, or the Genovese syndrome, came to stand for diffusion of responsibility, the opposite of the Good Samaritan. On one trip into the Middle East during the Second Intifada, a Palestinian woman teacher told me about her deepest fear, that the young she was teaching were now going through a process she called rhinocerization, the toughening of the skin that results in callousness. The soul, she said, tears in her eyes, suffocates inside the cage of rhinocerization, and she was equally worried about Israeli youth. Excuse me. It's only fairly recently that after years of women's movement pressure, we now have laws stipulating that an outsider, a neighbor, a relative, a passerby, can not only report abuse, but the charge will stick, even if the survivor herself chooses out of fear to drop or not press charges. There's no safety in not getting involved, no safety in minding your own business. This is our business. So ask not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. No woman is an island. If you see or hear or suspect something, say something. Say something. Our first guest, Pramila Jayapal, is an author and an international reproduction rights activist. She's a distinguished fellow, well, let's not say fellow, let's say scholar, at the University of Washington Law School. She's a leading immigration rights advocate and the founder of One America, Washington State's largest immigrant rights organization. Welcome, Pramila, to Women's Media Center Live.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you, Robin.
You're the co-lead of We Belong Together campaign. It is just what we finally needed to bring women's voices to a real activist movement presence in as Congress prepares legislation on immigration.
Well, it is absolutely the perfect time and the necessary time, and I think that, we've always known, of course, that immigration is a women's issue, but I just don't think we put it out there in terms of the analysis of the immigration policy as it is, as well as immigration reform bills of the past that have deliberately excluded women in so many different ways. And I think the minute we did that as part of the We Belong Together campaign, we saw tremendous response both from the Hill as well as from women across the country because we just connected the dots. So fundamentally, we have about 2/3 to 3/4 of all immigrants to the United States are women and children. Mm-hmm. And yet what we found is that, for example, 70% of women get their immigration status through the family immigration system, and that is the system that has about 4.3 million people waiting in a backlog. That means a person who's here legally can apply for citizenship for their immediate family members and sometimes wait for 2 decades to bring a child into the country.
My God.
So that's one way. Another way that everybody is talking about the roadmap to citizenship, Robin, and, when we think about undocumented immigrants in the country, about half of them are women. Well, previous proposals around legalizing the undocumented have actually required that somebody who's applying for legal status would have to provide pay stubs. Well, we know that a lot of women work in industries that don't give pay stubs. They work as nannies, as domestic workers, or they're, 40% of undocumented women are at home taking care of their own kids so that their spouses can go out and work. And so this immigration bill, we were able to mobilize women across the country to say, no, we need to make sure that any legalization program for the undocumented includes women. And so we've been able to put in provisions, and we're going to have to fight to keep them in, but we've been able to put in provisions that essentially, in order to transfer status from this provisional status, which everybody would get at the beginning if you're undocumented, to permanent legal status, there is proof of employment, but that employment includes things like being a primary caregiver. Uh-huh. It includes, affidavits of support from nonprofit organizations to say, yes, you've been working as a domestic worker. And so we're very pleased about that. 27% of employment visas currently go to women.
My God. That's staggering.
Yes, in 2013, and that's the situation we have. And so the bill that's currently in the Senate does include a category of visas, W visas, that would be provided for certain professions that women tend to dominate, such as caregiving, in-home health care, that kind of thing. But also, I think we're going to have to do a lot of work with corporations, obviously, to make sure that they are sponsoring women, because a lot of those employment visas are visas that companies have to sponsor women for, and I think it's just a very visible way in which women continue to be excluded from the workforce through the immigration.
It's interesting because it talk about connecting the dots. I mean, there's an echo in this over immigration policy, an echo of women's unpaid labor as an issue that we've looked at for some time in the home, in the subsistence gardening, in child raising internationally. I mean, in this country alone, if it were factored into the national accounts, it changes the national accounts by the GDP by 40%. And then in countries, say in the global south, where virtually all of the labor of women is unpaid, it's even more startling. So you're seeing it surface again here. It doesn't count as labor, so they can't get in. It's amazing how it pops up again and again and again.
It is, and it's one of the things that, one of the arguments we have put together as part of the We Belong Together campaign, which I should say is really designed to do two things. One, to lift up a gender analysis of immigration policy and make sure that the bill itself includes the priorities of women.
Yes.
But two, really mobilize women around the country, both immigrant and non-immigrant, to understand that immigration is actually central to women's equality. And I think that, those connections that you mentioned between sort of what we've been fighting for here in the United States and around the world around women's work being really recognized for what it is in all ways, I think really is one connector. And so is the idea that, women's equality really is about being able to allow every single woman, regardless of who she is, to contribute everything she has to give, to take away those pieces that limit her. And I think immigration policy is really, it's sort of a central backbone to people being able to do that, because if you can't be here with legal status, if you can't have your family member here, if you can't get work because of your immigration status, then you're stopped from doing everything else. It's an incredible opportunity, I think, for American feminism as well to really think about how we, continue to evolve and diversify the issues that we think of as being, women's equality issues. So
yes.
It's been wonderful to see, the response from around the country.
Yes, that's lovely. Talk about the April 10th demonstration. I was very sad that I was unable to make it. I was giving a speech elsewhere, but there was an assembly in Washington. Yes, this was the first coming together of the campaign?
Yes, the campaign launch was actually at the beginning of March, and we had 250 women that We Belong Together brought to Washington, D.C. from 35 states around the country, and we also had partners. The National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum brought a couple hundred people, as did the Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. And so we had about 800 women in D.C., and Robin, you won't believe it, for the first time in the history of immigration discussions on the Hill, we were able to get a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on women and immigration. That is the first time that's ever happened.
Wow.
Senator Hirono, who happens to be the only immigrant woman senator.
Yes, from Hawaii.
Unfortunately, the only one from Hawaii. She chaired the hearing, and it was just fantastic. We were really able to bring up a lot of these issues, and I think that what you saw is both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans, feeling like they did need to take into account both women's voices and immigrant voices, both of which were determinative in the last election. So it was a really remarkable launch, a remarkable collection of non-immigrant women who lead women's organizations and organizations for women's equality,
right,
there to say that immigration is really a critical issue. And then, of course, we had immigrant caregivers from across the country, nannies, domestic workers,
wow,
other women, immigrant women, undocumented women, dreamers, young DREAM Act students who came out, and people were, I think, just so moved by the ability to really bring their feminism, the issue of women's equality, and immigration all together.
We have a very active listenership, an activist listenership to this program. So we've only got about a minute left, but tell people, if you will, what we can do to be involved if we're not involved. Is there a website?
There's a campaign website, www.webelongtogether.org. And the next 2 weeks are going to be very active weeks where we're going to need emails and phone calls in to defeat bad amendments that would make the bill worse. And we also have a number of really fun and interactive social media opportunities. We're going to be asking women across the country to take pictures of themselves in fedoras and send them in as a sign of all the hats that women might wear. We still all support immigration reform. And so there's lots of opportunities, and I hope people will sign up for the listserv, sign up, go to the website, and see what they can do, because we really need every voice to be in here in this debate.
Absolutely. This is the crunch time. And I love the hat campaign. It reminds me of Bella Abzug.
Yes.
It's just throwing her hat in the ring. But I will, and I don't think I have a hat. But, I have a baseball cap. Yes. Okay. So I have a hat to wear. Oh,
We'll get you a fedora, Robin.
I'll get a fedora. I'll get a fedora. Thank you so much, Pramila. It's wonderful work, and you come back and report more on it when the legislation is done, and what more we need to do to keep the pressure on and hold their feet to the fire.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me on.
We need to take a short break, but I want to mention that June 6th is a National Day of Action on Immigration Reform, with a special focus on women, girls, and families. A coalition of national women's movement groups is participating from NOW to the YWCA, so check it out. Now, when we come back, we'll talk with Carmen Gonzalez, one of the mothers of an important book. You're listening to Women's Media Center Live, and I'm Robin Morgan, but you know that. Don't go away. After Hurricane Sandy, parts of the East Coast have returned to normal, but others won't see normal again for quite some time. One group getting volunteers and aid supplies to those who need it is called Occupy Sandy. Made up of a coalition of Occupy Wall Street activists, community organizers, and technologists, Occupy Sandy is using social media and other software tools to identify and quickly respond to urgent needs among the hardest-hit communities. You can help. To donate or to volunteer, visit occupysandy.org.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
And we're back. Welcome to the ivy-covered walls that hide quite a bit of pain. Carmen Gonzalez is a professor of law at Seattle University School of Law, specializing in domestic and international environmental law. She has published widely. She was a fellow or a scholar at the Supreme Court and was vice chair of the International Subcommittee of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the U.S. Environment Protection Agency. But she's a woman of color in the still pale male-dominated academy. Welcome, Carmen, to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
I want to celebrate what you and your three co-compilers and co-editors have wrought. That's Gabriela Gutierrez Imus, Yolanda Flores Niemann, and Angela P. Harris, and you have compiled and edited Presumed Incompetent, The Intersections of Race and Class for Women in Academia. It is a remarkable book that is long past due, breaks the silence, and tells truths that sear the brain, but that have to be said. How did this come to be? Tell us a little about that.
The four of us, as women of color in academia, struggled with what we saw was the very blatant race, class, and gender bias of that institution. We experienced it ourselves. We talked to other women about it and were mentoring other women who were going through the same experiences. And what we noticed is that this was ubiquitous, essentially. But there was a code of silence that women were not willing to break. And what that meant is that every time a woman was experiencing workplace abuse, she internalized it and thought she was the only one. And so we wanted to get it out there because this is the only way we could really change the situation.
Yeah, because reading this book, women are going to have the click. They're going to have what I call the you too moment, where suddenly they're not crazy, they're not alone, and they realize that it's systemic and it's political. I just want to read a fraction from the introduction in terms of statistics. These are from 2007, so they're season statistics. women of color held only 7.5% of full-time faculty positions. Moreover, the percentage of women of color declined steadily with rising academic rank. Big surprise there. Women of color comprised 10.4% of instructors and lecturers, 9.9% of assistant professors, 6.6% of associate professors, and only 3.4% of full professors. And in addition to being concentrated in the lower academic ranks, women of color are also overrepresented in less prestigious academic institutions, such as community colleges. So problem number one is even getting there, and then what happens to you once you're there is problems number 2 to 10,000.
Exactly. The statistics give you a sense that something is terribly wrong.
Yeah.
At a time when students of color are about a third of the U.S. college and university population, the fact that women of color are so underrepresented tells you a great deal. But we wrote the book because what we wanted to convey was the day-to-day lived experience. Why is this happening? What are the patterns? And so what we have in our book are a combination of personal narratives, but also studies by social scientists where they interview several hundred women and tease out some of the patterns in their experiences. Mm-hmm. And so one of the themes that dominates is the power of unconscious stereotypes. The dominant image of the professor continues to be white and male, particularly in math and the natural sciences, in law, in business, but in many other fields as well. And what that means is that those who depart from this unspoken and often unconscious norm are presumed incompetent as teachers, as scholars, as participants in faculty governance. And women of color who are furthest removed from that white male norm are reminded in subtle and not so subtle ways that they don't belong, and their knowledge and their ability is constantly questioned. One of the things that actually was startling to us, we expected that there would be some change because we have women of different generations represented in the book. Including women who are graduate students who did not write their own essays but were the ones interviewed. And what we saw was the same patterns repeating themselves. The lack of mentoring, the presumption that women were hired solely on the basis of race and gender and that they're not truly qualified for the positions that they occupy. Tokenism, women who are still the only faculty members of color in their department and are both extremely visible and extremely isolated and therefore truly at risk in terms of understanding the opaque codes that will determine their success. There's one essay that documents in detail, brings together the literature on gender and racial bias in student evaluations. And student evaluations are often used to determine whether or not a faculty member gets tenure, progresses, is promoted. And we also talk about class bias in higher education. Yes. But we'd like to think that things are getting better, but in fact, sadly, they're not. And part of the reason they're not is that what is required is a movement. What is required is talking about the patterns and forming alliances, both within identity groups and across identity groups, to change the culture of the academic workplace. I have to say that every time I have guest taught in academia, which has been a number of times, a guest professor here, a visiting scholar there, I have come away stunned and awed by the non-acknowledgement of the politics which are present all the time, the subtle and incredibly cruel stuff that goes down sometimes. It is incredibly cruel, and I can say as someone who practiced law for 10 years before becoming a faculty member, that what continues to stun me is how much worse the politics are than what I saw in law firms and a corporate environment. And in part, it's because of the ambiguity of the criteria by which faculty members are evaluated. That allows all sorts of unconscious and sometimes conscious bias to operate and to do a tremendous amount of harm.
There is an optimism in the book, not resting necessarily on the institution, but resting on the women.
At the end of the day, what we wanted to talk about were strategies for transforming the workplace, strategies for surviving and strategies for change. Because it's not enough to talk about the problem. That's essential because there has been a deafening silence. But there are particular things that can be done. And so in our book, in every essay, but also in a final chapter that brings together all of the solution-oriented approaches, we lay out three different types of strategies. One is an individual strategy. How can you survive with your physical and mental health intact when grappling with the subtle and not so subtle race, gender, and class issues of the academic workplace? The second is collective. What are the best ways of building supportive alliances with like-minded colleagues? Because strong alliances, such as cross-generational mentoring and peer networks, don't provide just emotional support, but also information about salary, benefits, institutional politics, how to navigate the tenure and promotion process.
Practical stuff.
Absolutely practical. And these are opportunities for collective action as well. And then finally, we talk about the institutional obstacles, because there are better and worse ways of trying to deal with your personal situation, but ultimately this is political. This is institutional.
Yep.
And there are concrete things that deans, provosts, chairs, university presidents can do to enhance the hiring, the promotion, the retention, but in the end, the full inclusion of women of color in the academic workplace. And so we want to lay those out so that women can actually share them with people who are in a position to implement them and also struggle collectively to get them implemented.
The book's called Presumed Incompetent, The Intersections of Race and Class for Women in Academia. It's in paperback and Kindle, and get it and read it. Thanks again, Carmen.
Thank you, Robin.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. This is a batch of weird facts on food and eating. Americans, on average, eat 18 acres of pizza every single day. Banging your head against a wall uses 150 calories an hour. I don't know what I can add to that one. Every time you lick a stamp, you're consuming 1/10 of a calorie. So if you want to go on a diet, you have to get the self-adhesive kind. If you yelled for 8 years, 7 months, and 6 days, you will have produced enough sound energy to heat 1 cup of coffee. I don't think I have anything to add to that one either. And this one I just adore. Nutmeg is extremely poisonous if injected intravenously, otherwise known as death by eggnog. And then there's a bunch of quotes, not quotes, but factoids, that are not so much weird as awesome about the brain. The total number of synapses, the connections between neurons in the cortex of the human brain, is estimated to be more than 160 trillion, 160 trillion. The number of neurons in the human spinal cord is approximately 1 billion. The average adult human brain weighs about 1,400 grams, that's like 3 pounds, or about 2% of total body weight. And, this is encouraging, a study funded by the National Institute of Health found that cognitive training can counteract 7 to 14 years of age-related cognitive decline because the brain's plasticity, its ability to learn and change, continues. So, I don't know about you, but I am really, really glad about President Obama's new initiative, the Brain Research Through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies, or BRAIN for short, project. It's fantastic, and we know less about the brain than many other organs, and yet it's more important. And it's break time. This is Women's Media Center Live, and so far I'm still Robin Morgan. When you think of college athletics these days, you can't help but think of scandals, sexual abuse of students, serious injuries, rabid win-at-all-costs coaches and alumni, the jock sensibility. Our next guest is a college president who did away with all that. She'll be with us in just a moment.
When it comes to talk radio, men still do most of the talking. It doesn't get too much better if you look at television, newspapers, film, video games, social media, literature, sports, and corporate or technology leadership. The Women's Media Center's Status of Women in the U.S. Media 2013 report details the persistent gender disparity in a range of media institutions that rank among the greatest influencers in American society. To read the full report, go to womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
And welcome back. Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum is the president of Spelman College and the author of Can We Talk About Race and Other Conversations in an Era of School Resegregation. She's a gentle, soft-spoken woman who may well have begun a revolution on college campuses across this nation. Welcome, Dr. Tatum, to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you, Robin.
Well, brava. You have basically replaced sports as student athletics with fitness. And everything from that attends college athletics, from accidents to preoccupation with winning, seems to have gone away, freeing people up to actually be fit and healthy. Tell us what you did. Tell us how you did it.
Well, I'm happy to tell you what led to this decision to eliminate our participation in NCAA Division III athletics. It began with a problem. We were part of an athletic conference which was made up of 7 institutional members, 7 schools, which is the minimum number you need for a conference. And we learned in December 2011 that 3 of the schools in our conference were going to be leaving to join a different conference, which left us with the problem of having an athletic conference with too few members. Mm-hmm. So that was really what got us started thinking about what should we do about our athletics program. Should we try to join another conference, perhaps compete with schools further away that would add more travel time, more expense to the program? Mm-hmm. What should we do? That was the original question. And as we thought about that, I learned from our athletic director that we had 80 students participating out of a population of 2,100, about 4% of our students participating in our athletics program. But the cost of the program was almost $1 million. And that seemed very expensive for such a small number of students. Yeah. But also, we knew that anything we chose to do to solve our problem, our conference problem, was going to increase that cost, because it would perhaps involve us traveling to schools further away, more time out of class, but also more transportation costs, and maybe even having to add more sports. So one of the questions I asked was, what's the level of interest among young black women, because that's primarily our population at Spelman, in participating in intercollegiate athletics? And as we investigated that question, what I learned was that an NIH study had reported that 50% of young African-American women over the age of 13 report no physical leisure activity at all. Mm. So that told me that many of our students are not going to be interested necessarily in coming to play sports. But I also learned that the health data on this young population was really quite disturbing. 44%, the Centers for Disease Control report, will have hypertension by the age of 20. The risk of becoming type 2 diabetics is twice the average risk for white women. 4 out of 5 young black women is either overweight or obese, and there's so many health issues related to those rates of obesity and sedentary activity that I began to think about the fact that we had a population that perhaps needed wellness more than intercollegiate athletics, and that if we reallocated those resources, the almost $1 million we were spending on this group of 80 students, and invested it in a wellness initiative for the whole campus, we could impact the life trajectory of 2,100 students, but not just those students, but also the people they would influence in their lives, their own family members, in the end, their children, their community members, and that could really be an impact that would be really worth investing in at Spelman.
That's some kind of ripple effect, you know.
Yeah. Which is why we call it the wellness revolution, actually. When we made the decision to withdraw, and it wasn't an easy decision, of course. There were 80 disappointed students, some of whom have graduated since the decision was made, but about half of them still at Spelman, who would be graduating in 2014 and 2015, who are, quite disappointed by the decision we made. But many of them are now coming to see the value in a program that engages their classmates in a lifetime, hopefully a lifetime, of physical activity, which will improve everyone's health.
Right. You must have encountered considerable opposition.
There were certainly some alumni who raised questions about whether this was a good idea. But when I explained, as I have repeatedly, the idea that our goal is to engage the whole campus in the kind of lifelong fitness activities that will improve their health trajectories and extend their lives, activities like tennis and golf and swimming and yoga and Pilates and Zumba classes, the kind of physical activities that professional women often engage in their spare time if they've developed that habit. And recognizing that the reality for young women who play intercollegiate athletics, particularly at the Division III level, they're not going on to become professional sports players after graduation, and typically they drop those sports activities. They're not still playing soccer after work. They're not still doing volleyball or basketball, and so they may fall into habits of inactivity. So when we look at the benefit, the health benefit that all of our students could achieve, and when our alumni realized that indeed they too had gotten kind of sedentary and maybe it would have been helpful to them to develop some habits while they were at school, I think they could see the logic of it.
There's a whole new, I think, examination of obsessive college sports, obsessive athletics, where the alumni come in and don't care if anybody gets a degree as long as they win. And to me, it's a very much a boys' thing, a guy's thing. I'm not saying that women are not involved and cannot be athletes, obviously, but it seems to me that women's athletics at schools, even when it isn't a bit of an obsession, it's not the same kind of total obsession that it is with the guys. So I imagine that there are a number of schools that are looking to you for that leadership. And is there a chance of this catching, do you think?
Well, I do think that there are schools, particularly small schools, that are not part of the big Division I intercollegiate athletic business. I'm going to call it the sports business.
It is.
But the smaller schools that have teams where there are no athletic scholarships involved, young people are playing for the love of the sport, are increasingly understanding that these programs are quite expensive. And while the students who participate in these activities are generally quite enthusiastic about them, they, love the sport that they're playing. At the same time, you do have to ask the question, is this expense delivering the benefit for the whole student body that we would like to see delivered? One of the things we are excited about at Spelman as we envision a campus-wide wellness initiative that will touch 2,100 students is that we need to create the space for that to happen. We have a building which is over 60 years old. It was built in 1950 when we had 511 students at Spelman. Today we have 2,100. So reconstructing that facility to really accommodate 2,100 active women is one of the things that we have as part of our initiative, and that's an expensive undertaking, $18 million. But we've got $6 million in hand and actively raising the rest, so we are excited about what we will be able to do as a model across the nation and invite people to come and see us, we hope, in our new building in a year or so.
Oh, that's
exciting.
That's very exciting. So if there's anybody out there with a checkbook that's just itching to support women's fitness, and in particular African-American women's fitness and health, this is a good place to write the check to.
The Surgeon General says that this is the first generation who will live, it's estimated, 5 years less than their parents.
Yes.
Simply because they're sedentary.
Yes. Which is why this is so smart. I love this idea. I just love the idea that it's Spelman that started it, and it's Spelman's president that had the guts to take that stand and to envision a new way of doing things. And so I thank you for that. And I'm standing on the side with my pom-poms at the ready, for fitness.
Thank you for that support and that enthusiasm.
And thank you for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live.
It's my pleasure.
Time for another pause. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I am still tediously Robin Morgan. When we come back, we'll talk with the president of Barnard College, Debora Spar, about the exciting transformations she's introduced there and the generation of leaders-to-be that she's nurturing. Hang in and we'll learn more after the break.
Want to stay informed when there are changes to Social Security? Subscribe to receive automatic email updates on popular Social Security web pages with the click of a button. Just visit www.socialsecurity.gov/GOV delivery. More than 1 million people already receive updates to the pages they're most interested in. You can too. Look for the red envelope followed by a link that says Get Email Updates. To learn more, visit www.socialsecurity.gov/GOV delivery. Social Security delivers.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
And we're back again, this time with President Debora Spar of Barnard. A political scientist, she's also authored numerous books, including the one titled The Baby Business, How Money, Science, and Politics Drive the Commerce of Conception. But we'll focus today on how she's turned up the heat and the light at Barnard. Debora, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
There's a lot to talk about. You are the 7th president of Barnard College, and you've been there, about 4 years?
Just finishing my 5th, actually.
Your 5th, okay.
Yeah.
And since your arrival, you have spearheaded a number of really, to me, important initiatives, and I would love you to talk about them. One is the Athena Center for Leadership Studies, and the other is the Global Symposium Series.
The Athena Center was really prompted by our idea, somewhat ambitiously, to be honest, of creating the premier center for women's leadership in the United States. And we took about a year or two when I first came to really pull back and say, what would it take and what would it involve to create a center that was really focused academically on understanding women's leadership without being polemical about it, without being argumentative about it. We wanted to really investigate the two linked questions. Mm-hmm. Do women lead differently than men? Mm-hmm. And being, as we are, a center located in an undergraduate women's college, what can we teach young women during these critical years of between 18 and 22 that will help them become leaders throughout the rest of their lives? So it's an academic mission, but really implanted with a very practical agenda. We want to help young women think about leadership and become leaders. Yeah. And we were so lucky early on to hire Kitty Colbert to become the director of the center. And Kitty, as some of your listeners may know, really was one of the leaders in the reproductive rights movement.
Yes.
And just a phenomenal woman, deeply committed to women's causes, and just someone who knows how to make things happen. So Kitty took that project and has run with it. We now have over 200 students enrolled. And the beauty of the program is that it sits on top of the regular liberal arts curriculum. Mm-hmm. So our students don't major in leadership. They major in English or religion or political science or whatever they want, but they take this leadership curriculum in addition to their regular studies. They spend some additional coursework thinking about leadership, looking at leadership and history, and then obviously they have to run a project which forces them to become a leader, to actually work with a team, which is crucial. And then they take a bunch of skills-based laboratories. And these are short courses, but they're really focused on the skills we think all people need to become leaders, but which women, statistically speaking, tend not to learn as much about over the course of their lives.
For example?
Finance.
Aha.
Yeah, it's one of those nasty little things. You know, if you want to run a nonprofit, and perhaps particularly if you want to run a nonprofit, you have to know something about finance and money.
Yep.
So we teach finance. We teach negotiation. We teach fundraising. We teach public speaking. All of these skills.
Interesting. You know, I mean, at Women's Media Center, one of the signature programs is the Progressive Women's Voices, where we teach how to deal with media. And those concrete skills of writing an op-ed piece, conducting an interview, being interviewed,
Absolutely.
Holding a press conference. And those are things that women have been de facto just barred from, or almost unconsciously or semi-consciously or consciously excluded from. So
right, or they choose not to pursue because they don't think they're that critical. And
that
yet,
too.
As you know better than anybody, if you're going to lead any organization, you have to convince others of your ideas. And it means speaking and writing and arguing.
That's right. And it demystifies the cult of leadership also, because it reduces it quite properly to skills and discipline and stuff that can be acquired with enough perseverance. And there's always inspiration, but there's a lot of perspiration.
That's exactly right. And it's not rocket science. They're skills. We also, and again, kudos go to Kitty Colbert for this, we've launched the Athena Film Festival.
Yes.
Which has become, it is the only or the largest women's film festival in New York City. Only 3 years in, but it's a joint project with Women in Hollywood, and it's just been a smashing success. And it honors women behind the camera in all different ways, whether they be as writers, producers, directors, cinematographers. And I must say, I was shocked to see how bad the numbers are for women in Hollywood.
Oh.
You somehow think they were better than in finance, but they're actually worse.
Oh, yes. We did, in fact, an entire show about those numbers and the Sundance Research, Institute research numbers as well.
Yeah, they're astonishing.
Yeah, they are.
So we're really trying to change that by highlighting women in film, and that's been another great project.
Well, I've been a fan of the festival and come to it a number of times,
and we appreciate it, and it's fun too.
It is. They're good movies. It's like popcorn and feminism.
That's right. It turns out to be a pretty good combination.
Very good combination. Yes.
So the other big initiative we've rolled out is, as you mentioned, these global symposia. And this was an idea that really just started on a whim and a prayer. Columbia University was opening the first of its global centers in Beijing in 2009, which was my first year at Barnard. And they graciously invited me to join them for the opening. I said yes. And then one of my colleagues brought to my attention, just sort of coincidentally, the fact that someone had applied to the college referring to a woman named Kang Tong Pi, who had been her role model. And we did a little bit of investigation, and it turned out that Kang Tong Pi had been a crucial woman reformer in China fighting to end foot binding, and had also graduated Barnard, the first Chinese woman, in 1909.
Oh, wow.
So it hit us. It was the 100th anniversary of her graduation. I was going to be in China. So we sort of said, gee, let's put on a symposium. And from that grew this idea of having a symposium on women changing China, looking at the women in China today who, like Kang Tong Pi, were really fighting for change. And because we didn't have a lot of money behind us, we stumbled onto what turned out to be a really powerful formula. Rather than bringing a lot of Americans over to speak at the conference, which tends to be the norm, we only invited Chinese women to speak.
Yeah.
And we wound up with this incredible group of women across sectors. There was a movie star, there was a TV producer, there was an academic, there was a former Army colonel. It was just a beautiful group, and we had an equally diverse audience. There were high school girls, there were college girls, there were much older women. And it really turned out to be a very powerful formula because most women's conferences tend to be narrower. Mm-hmm. They're women in media or women in politics, or they're of a certain age group. And we just had this really diverse, locally focused event. So we figured we had a winning formula. And so the next year we did the conference in Dubai, looking at women in the Middle East.
Wow.
Then we moved to Africa, and we had a fabulous conference in Johannesburg, looking at some of the amazing women changing Africa. Then Mumbai, and just most recently in Sao Paulo. And it's really proven to be, as I said, a winning formula. It's a fun day. We get a very diverse array of women speaking. And I think what's been most powerful, and we really had not expected it, is the combination of the age groups.
Of course.
There's nothing more inspiring for 66-year-old women to be asked questions by 15-year-old girls. And we're lucky by being located in New York City, particularly with regards to the Athena Center, because there's so many women leaders in such a wide array of fields who are either in or come through New York.
We've only got about a minute left, to my frustration, but say a little something on where you think your women students are these days, because, you know, the media is always saying nobody cares about feminism. They were saying that in 1968, and they've been saying it consistently through the life and expansion and growth of the women's movement. And all I know is whenever I go to speak, there's a whole lot of young women, and they're really pissed off for the right reason. And there's a lot of young men now, too.
That's right.
And it may not be the identical feminism, but thank God for that. What are you finding?
You know, every time I have a bad day, I just need to hang out with the students for a little while because they inspire me. This is a great generation coming up. These girls, young women, they're energized, they're enthusiastic. They kind of want to have it all, but they actually realize that they can't, that they're going to have to make decisions. I think they have been energized by some of the bad politics of the past year. Certainly the possibility of constraints on reproductive rights
yes, you can
have energized them.
You can always trust the right wing to radicalize people.
That's right. That is certainly happening. You know, this is a generation that's grown up, for better or worse, convinced that they could and would change the world, and that energy and enthusiasm really covers the whole range of women's issues as well.
Well, they're also, I must say, frankly, lucky to have you as the president of Barnard, if they're Barnard students. So,
well, they're a great group, and they're about to graduate next week, and we welcome the next crop.
Okay, and we welcome you, and we'll welcome you back in the fall when your book comes out, the new book, Wonder Women, Sex, Power, and the Quest for Perfection, which comes out in September. And thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you, Robin. It was a great pleasure.
And now it's time for Fighting Words. So a group of women friends were sitting around, my women friends. We were talking about the Arab Spring and the fact that the U.S. is leaving Afghanistan, and what about the women? Are the women better off for having been given a glimpse of freedom and then being shut down again? We know what the Taliban will do, particularly to those women who learned to read or taught girls to read or started small businesses or took jobs or got a divorce. And we went round and round on the moral issue. Should we have gone in at all? If we did, should we have raised expectations among the women? Some of us pointed out that for about 11 years before 9/11, we were banging our hands on the doors of the United Nations and the U.S. saying there was gender apartheid in Afghanistan. Would somebody do something about it? But, of course, no one would until 9/11. So we didn't go in there to free the women. It was a side bargain, a bonus. And there were some of us who felt that the women were not better off, and that we should have left it alone. And I got very murky in my mind about it, which whenever I get that way and can't really find the moral touchstone, I tend to step outside the paradigm, because I know that patriarchy's in my brain as much as outside my brain. I was raised in one, and I can't see the clear moral path unless I make it among equals. So I thought of, well, what if it were all men or all women and not some of each? And immediately it became clear to me, would we, for example, criticize abolitionists, male or female, who aided people who were escaping from slavery in the South in the Underground Railway? Would we criticize the abolitionists for helping them escape simply because if they were caught, we know that they would suffer a hideous, tortuous death? No, we wouldn't criticize the abolitionists, because it's the job of a movement to support a movement on a movement level. These women have a right, every right, to our support, and we have a right to offer it, every right, and to continue offering it even when governments withdraw. And that's it for this week. You've been listening to us on CBS station 1580 AM, radio in Washington, D.C., and on the web at WMClive.com, which also has podcasts of previous shows. I hope you'll email me at womensmediacenterlive@gmail.com. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and for this program, Executive Producer Julie Burton. Senior Producer Crystal Williams-Chancellor, Technical Director Michelle Kinsey-Bruns, and our founding sponsor, Regina Kulik-Scully. I am Robin Morgan. Thank you for being with us. Join us next week when our guests will include the feminist country music singer Ashley Monroe. And, oh, that reminds me, will you be in Washington, D.C. or the area around there on Monday, May 20th? Because our coming up guest, Ashley Monroe, will be singing in concert with Don Williams at the Birchmere in Alexandria, Virginia, and you can get tickets through Ticketron and something called Ticketmaster, and I'm just getting it. The website is Songkick, SONGKICK.com. Ticketmaster's on there, and Ticket Network is. So that's Monday, May 20th at the Birchmere in Alexandria, Virginia. And you get tickets on Songkick.com to hear Ashley Monroe. And also next week, frontline war photographer and journalist Heidi Levine will be joining us. Only here on Women's Media Center Live.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.